Welcome to the Life You're Made For with me, Dr. Heather Penny. We're going to be having conversations that talk about us spiraling up versus spiraling down, because we all want to be living lives that are about thriving, not just surviving. This is the life you're made for. So let's get going. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be back. I'm with a dear friend and colleague of mine, Laura Cootsona. Hey, Laura.
Hi,
Heather. Laura has so much extensive work in the field of consulting and is everything from her Jesus Center and nonprofits, and even having her own consulting firm now called Goodwell Consulting. So, Laura, I'm going to have you just tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do. But I have loved watching you and the work that you're doing, and really your passion for nonprofits and any nonprofit leader that is working hard to move humanity forward. So tell us a little bit about who you are and some of the passions around what you do.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah. Wow. So 2 years ago, I rebranded my company and named it Goodwell Consulting. And it really sums up in so many ways what I am excited about, which is really to help humans, individuals, and groups and organizations and communities define what their good is and figure out how to do that good well. And all those things are changeable depending on the context, but really making sure that it's clear what you individually or your group is about, and then figuring out what would the behaviors be, what would the markers of success be, and how are you going to get there? And so whether I'm a trainer or a consultant or the expert in the room, or just merely a facilitator trying to get out of the way in the room, or a coach, cheerleader, I always joke, I've got pom-poms. I've got little leather whips.
You pulled them out for me.
I've got all sorts of tools to depending on the moment. Some people just need to be reminded that their good is in fact good and it's worthy of their investment. And other times it's like, oh, that's a little mushy. Let's get a little clearer on that. So I play in so many different spaces in people's lives, which is really fun and varied. Every day is a little different.
Yes. Well, I've gotten to observe it, and I actually got to go out to your Jesus Center, which was phenomenal. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about what that was? Because I got to tour it, and I was taking it all in, and I thought this is an amazing workout here.
Yeah. So in 2015, I had the amazing privilege of being asked to be the executive director of the Jesus Center, obviously a faith-based organization serving those experiencing homelessness. And in a lot of ways, it was a very traditional soup kitchen model. We served a meal, 2 meals a day, every day of the week, and had a small shelter for women and children and one transitional house in 2015. And as I think everyone knows, in the last, decade, really, homelessness and the face of homelessness has dramatically changed. Where once maybe we thought of people just being simply without housing, now we're really looking at it as a more holistic challenge, looking at a whole person, right? Looking at their physical, emotional, mental, and circumstantial, right? They're just their daily living. As a whole situation. And it's very difficult to determine what is the chicken, if you will, and what's the egg in terms of cause and effect, but the combination of issues. So it wasn't long after I got there that we started to think differently about how we were going to deliver services, what services we really needed to offer, and how we needed to transform the organization. So fast forward to 2020, we opened a new facility with 58 beds of 24/7 sheltering for men and women. And then this summer or this fall, 23, not under my leadership anymore, but certainly with my great joy, they opened another 27,000 square feet with beds for 24/7 beds for the elderly and 14 fully equipped apartment style units for families. And there's, I think now they're operating 8 transitional houses. So it's really dramatically changed. There's there's a Ampla Health, which is a full service health facility within that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a vocational lab and store. It just goes on and on. So it's much more holistic and transformational. I think we thought
Mm-hmm.
if our good is to help humans get back on their feet again and live their best life,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the facility or the services to do that. And yet we were investing a lot of money and energy and honestly, some of the folks we were feeding, which of course is a good unto itself, we were never going to actually change their lives if they were unsheltered. And we just weren't able to offer the sheltering. So now, and then currently the Jesus Center is also operating almost 200 micro units for the city of Chico. So all told, it's somewhere in the range of 375 beds that are under their domain now, which is, it's kind of hard to believe when we started with 23.
That is amazing. That's what blew me away when I was out there. And I think this is why I was so excited to have you endorse my book. So thanks again for doing that. But
my pleasure.
The idea of grace space, man, you're living it out. And, I define it in the book as offering goodwill, consideration, kindness to one another. Neither one is superior nor inferior. We're all equal. That's the essence of living not only in a space of grace, but offering it. So I want to just pivot over there and just ask you a little bit about what you've learned as you were reading through it and how you are applying it in your work in the world that you live and lead in.
Yeah. Well, as is typical, Heather, with what you write and contribute to the world, it resonates with a lot of my core values and things that I'm learning. And so it really came at a great time this year and went into conversation with some of the other materials and learnings that I was engaged in. And I think that very first practical tip, the response versus reaction, it just resonates on lots of levels. I've been reading a lot about the power of the pause and that choice. And just as a small aside, my word for the year is choice.
I love that. I love words for the year.
I know you do. And that choice point that we have. And so actually, in some ways, all of your tips, all 7 of them, relate to the pause. It's choosing into an intentional approach. And I think if you want to build grace space for yourself and for others and for your community, which I do, you have to choose daily into that. And so that reaction versus response is just that, right? It's saying, I'm feeling or hearing what I'm about to want to say. And I'm an extreme extrovert who's verbally very, very quick. And so how do you put a pause or a muzzle on this one? My lifelong journey, I think. But having said that, knowing that if I can focus on what it is that, again, I'm trying to create in the world. The book that I've been in conversation with for the last couple of years is called 3 Vital Questions by David Emerald. And I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but he uses the Stephen Cartman drama triangle and creates a secondary triangle. So the drama triangle is essentially there's a victim, a persecutor, and a rescuer.
Oh, I have seen that. Yeah.
And the whole dance is problem oriented. Something happens, it happens to me. You're the bad guy, you're the persecutor. And then there's a good guy that comes in with her cape and saves the day. But all in all, the victim feels like garbage. There is no grace. It's a lot of either condemnation or sort of pity-based saving. And there's no grace. So David Emerald really feels like he was given this secondary triangle, and he calls it TED, the empowerment dynamic. You got to read it, Heather. It's awesome.
I do. What's the name of the book again?
It's called The 3 Vital Questions. He also has a book called I think, The Power of TED. And the TED triangle is the rescuer becomes the creator, or I like using co-creator. The persecutor becomes the challenger, and the rescuer becomes the coach.
Oh, wow.
But what's great about the whole TED dynamic and the reason you want to live over there is it's outcome oriented.
Mm.
And the power for me in conflict, and I think about this in terms of your connection versus protection.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a single outcome in mind, which
Mm-hmm.
is to be pro-relational, which I think Grace Space is all pro-relational. It's
Totally.
like,
Mm-hmm.
we want to connect. That is our bottom line. If we forget that, we turn into well, you're hurting me because you said this thing, instead of saying, oh, look, we're trying to figure out something together.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said your idea, it made me feel small. Let's get curious about that, right?
Yeah.
But it's the outcome that keeps reminding you of like, oh, we're solving a problem together. So we have a hiccup in the road.
Mm-hmm.
I can choose to be protective or reactive or offended or defensive, or I can choose into this other way. And so I think it's the essence of living in grace is, again, giving benefit of the doubt, not assuming the worst of each other, respecting that the other person is not coming with bad motivation. But, having said that, that's all sounds so easy. And I think what I think has been the big revelation in your book and and working with David's book is, man, we fall into that powerless victim.
Yeah.
Much quicker and much easier than we think. And when we become aware of it, we're like, maybe I want to choose out of that. And I think you give so many great practical approaches. I love the questioning versus accusing. Again, it's like, let's just show curiosity. Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking. When you said that, it made me feel this way, but I'm guessing that's not how you wanted me to feel. Like, what were you trying to, so just trying to stay in a neutral, non-accusatory, non-defensive space. So.
Well, I love that you brought up those two words, pause and choice. And I love that that's your word for the year too. I can't wait to hear more about that and what that word teaches you by the end of the year. But I think that you hit the nail on the head. We have a split second, a nanosecond to make a choice in that moment. And that's why I juxtaposed it. You can either choose connection or protection. But many of us, when we hit that fight or flight or that victim mode, it's a survival instinct that kicks in.
Totally.
And we start choosing protection, control, accusation, reaction. We start choosing that, but we don't even recognize we're choosing it. So I love that you captured it. And I'm sure there's probably thousands of more than these 7 practices, but these are 7 that I just zeroed in on. And to your point, you're right. It's not about perfection. It's just about having a lifeline to reach for when you're getting a little bit ambushed in that moment. Right. Because life is moving so fast, and being able to say, wait a minute, I have the power to choose, and I also have the power to pause. In the middle of pausing, I'm actually going to examine my choices. And so these are 7 to really focus on that says I get to choose a better way. And what I'm learning about it, humans, is we all want a better way. None of us like how it feels. And we've all done it. All my fingers pointing back when I've chosen the other less humane way, the less grace way, when I have reacted or I have accused. And you'll notice that my book was dedicated to my teenage son. I mean, this is where I learned a lot of this as we worked through it. And I remember telling him, son, I've never been a mother to a 16-year-old son. Like, you got to throw me a bone here, and I promise to sit here and we're going to get through this. But it was
not trying to mess this up.
And clearly I am. Like, there's no question of not getting it. But we got to have grace toward one another so we can figure this out together. So I love that you brought up those 2 points of pause and choice.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as I thought about, and I've been rereading the book over the last month, and just, it reminded me of an early story in my life when I had just had my second child, and it was it rocked my world. We were living in New York City. I had a 3-year-old, a newborn. My husband had a very big job. We were 3,000 miles away from any semblance of family. And I mean, it was some form of a crisis, whether it's postpartum depression or not, but it was kind of all the things, and it wasn't very pretty. And we were out in California visiting, and I just lost it. There might have been a car seat that flew across
Couple Cheerios.
Without the child in it, let me just say. The child was being held by some responsible adult. It wasn't me. But I just lost it and I just couldn't regain. And then I did a classic Laura Cootsona, which is, okay, then we're going to fix everything. I stopped nursing. I got on medication. I started exercising, eating, doing all the things. But the thing that was most impressive to me was realizing that I was being so hard on myself. And that something at the core of my being needed to accept, in my case, God's grace, that it was going to be okay when I didn't show up in all the ways that I thought I was supposed to show up. And that I was never going to be a good mom. I was never going to function in the world mentally if I didn't start there. And I could obviously never offer it to somebody else. And I think that's the piece too with your book, Heather. And I think you're gentle about this, but that idea that we can't offer grace space to those around us if we don't first give grace and make that grace space for ourselves and have people doing it for us too. I mean, it's not like something we just conjure up, but.
Yeah. I often say that leadership starts from within. And I think we all want to be authentic leaders, but it's easy to talk about whatever the 5 tips and techniques of good leadership, right?
Sure.
What all of us really want to know is, are you a good human? And are you someone we want to follow? Are you going to take care of us? Right. And
Character.
So I really try and go after that and say, hey, we all want to be authentic leaders. Let's make sure that we are talking about what that actually means. And for myself personally saying, this isn't about perfection. This is about practice. And these are 7 different practices that I am reaching for when I feel ambushed, when I feel like I want to strike back, when I feel like scared or nervous and just want to start accusing. This isn't about making sure that we have this perfected way of leading, but it's recognizing our humanity and our brokenness that we all are leading out of as well, but saying, no, in that split second, I'm going to take a second to choose. And so, as with all my books, I'm like, this is kind of my journals you guys are reading. This is me saying I'm going to practice this for several years before I even put it in print.
Totally.
And oh my gosh, and it's making me the human that I want to be. We all know who we want to be. It's really about carving out that path to get there, isn't it?
Well, and that's so true. I have colleagues of all stages and ages, but the ones that I'm most interested in serving right now are my younger female colleagues who, just to be all of these things and practice it with them and giving them the space and the time to grow and bringing that grace space to them. And I was debriefing a meeting that I was in. It wasn't my meeting, but I was participating last Friday with a friend and one of his colleagues who's probably, she's not that much younger than we are, but a little younger in her career. And she got up and spoke and shared what our group had talked about and kind of got herself into a little bit of not a misstep, a little bit of a misstep around some politically charged ideas. And I was very careful not to step in my verbal excitement to help her. And I said to her colleague, Richard, afterwards, I said, what was great about that is that she got to try that and feel that. And then we're going to encourage her the next time she gets up there to maybe listen a little, a little bit better, a little different. She's going to know what are those buzzwords that are going to push people. And we just have to give space for that. And that's part of it too. And I think that's that trust piece. I love both in your podcast about the book and in the book, just that idea that sometimes we just have to let things run a little longer. And I think it's that fear or need to control. They're like, oh, I'm going to come in and I'm going to, fix all of that. And I'm learning that one all the time. That is just such a huge one for me. Just like, okay, trust the process. This feels yucky right now. I'm just going to name that. Feels yucky. I want to fix this. I want to control it. I want to ensure a particular outcome. that's
I
not
know.
what, again, that's not the world I want to live in. And I don't want to be participant in making that for somebody else, you know?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. We don't want to participate in making that for someone else. Do you have an example that's coming to your mind about that split second choice of
Yeah,
control?
This year's been interesting for me, and I will keep it a little vague to protect the innocent, but I have had some causes, if you will, that have activated my advocate part,
Mm,
which is I have a big advocate part.
which I love about you. Just for the record, I'm going to
yeah.
put that down. I love that about you.
8 on the Enneagram, for those of you who know. And I weighed making some concerns known for a very long time, months actually. And then this fall, there's an organization that I felt was drifting, and particularly in their leadership. And so I pushed publicly and not so publicly, like kind of semi-publicly, like not, I didn't go to the newspaper publicly, but I went to their board and rallied some other folks to sort of wave the concern flag. And I got pretty shut down overall. I actually received a cease and desist letter from the organization, which was kind of a first.
Oh my goodness.
It's a very loud stop talking. And then heard from the board, not directly, but indirectly, that they weren't interested in any form of correction at this stage. And so I let it go to a certain extent. I mean, I did. I'm still in relationship with the organization, still working with them. But about 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting I'm very involved in the Campfire Collaborative, which is our long-term recovery group from our big fire in 2018. And we have been in existence for 5 years. And so we're doing some imagining of what might be another use for the organization, or like beyond recovery from the fire. And as luck would have it, there were just a couple of people in the room who took which was supposed to be a facilitating role, as someone who was basically conspiring to build a competitor to this organization that I had been critical of. And it was a big accusation, and I think mostly completely inaccurate to my motivation, and devastating to me. A couple of my colleagues came to me and said, this is what was going on the ground, and people were talking about it. And it kind of went back to a couple people who they're also advocates. That's kind of what they do. And I was able to have the trust and appreciation not to vilify them, because that's what they do. And I get it. And I get it really well. So that was good. But I think that the sort of the long-term hangover, if you will, from it is I feel neutralized. And in thinking about this particular dichotomy between trust and fear, it's actually, there's more of a nuance there than I would have expected. I think now I'm feeling, am I neutralized because I'm trusting the process and just letting it be? Or am I really afraid if I step out and continue to try to reimagine this organization, I'm going to get hammered again? And I'm not sure I really want to face more criticism. So I think I'm actually, trying to decide, am I acting in fear or in trust, and how that's
interesting.
How maybe it's a little bit of both, and maybe that's okay. But I'm trying to figure out, do I still have a role, or have I essentially been asked by the body, which isn't really the body. It's really just a couple people who have made these accusations, but I'm seeing them as, making me uncomfortable and making me unhappy and making me feel useless in this context.
Wow. Thanks for sharing
What should
that.
I do, Coach Heather? I mean, it's a quandary. Like, where is it in this?
Well, the other thought
from now, I'm just trusting a little bit in the process. The board chair said, can you hold on for 3 more months? And I adore her. And I said, I can do that. I can do that. And in choosing that versus I'm out, I think I'm saying, all right, I'll see what happens.
Well, and I can't help but think of the question too of, is this worth my energy and time? in as
One
an
of the questions. Yes.
yeah, as an advocate, which again I love about you. I'm sure you have to, as you've matured in age, you got to pick your battles, right? Got to pick your hills.
Totally. Totally.
So I guess I would say that's a third category. I don't think you're someone to ever be intimidated or walk in fear. I think I would wonder if there's probably a little bit of energy saying, is this worth my energy?
Right.
As I could go down this road, but is this really what I'm called to do? Is this where I want to spend my energy? What would be the ROI on this? And sometimes, I've noticed with myself too, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I got to do this. Even knowing it's not going to change, I got to do this for my own voice.
Yes.
And I think to let yourself a little bit off the hook to say, I don't know if it's that binary of fear. I think there's wisdom that you're engaging your discernment, that it's much more multifaceted. And maybe you're called to step in to advocate for that minority that maybe is getting marginalized or run over or unheard. And maybe they've chosen that and they're not speaking up for themselves, and you're going to be left holding the bag and it's not worth your energy. I don't know. Anything in between.
Right. I mean, that's
right?
the thing. I mean, and that's always if the advocate, as you win, the prize is you get to do the work usually. And
Yeah.
one, what's interesting about the campfire work is I'm not a survivor. I did not live up in the fire footprint. And when I came on the board, there were a few of us that are still on the board. We said, we're holding space. We're holding space for those who are currently fighting their own personal work, and eventually they'll come to their community work. And so over the years, we've expanded the board, and there's only 3 of us who weren't, directly affected by the fire. And it's interesting that at this stage, and so I always felt like, and I was there primarily for my organizational talents, my ability to run a meeting, to facilitate a meeting, to train leaders, to help them build committees, all that stuff that I do. And part of it is I serve at the pleasure in that sense. And if there's this suspicion that I've got this ulterior motive, then it does give me this permission to say, well, if I'm not bringing these things that seem to continue to add value, then that was the reason for staying.
Yeah.
And again, that's not me. I'm going to take my toys and leave. It's just like my toys need to be elsewhere, and especially this is my, my very large, volunteer commitment. It has been for 6 years. And so that's, a lot of important time and energy.
Well, and I think trust is on a continuum too. When I think our tendency sometimes is make it a switch. It's on or off. I'm in or out. And I love this about you because I think you have this awareness. So I would just say, I think you get to put them on a continuum. And part of it is like, I think we have to grieve. I think you and I are very similar. When we trust, we're all in. And there's a piece of me that I'm like, wow, I'm grappling with, they don't trust me anymore, or that trust has been broken. And I have to kind of grieve that. And then I have to recognize they don't want to rebuild with me. And I can't do things half-hearted. So in my younger years, I would just keep trying to rebuild a broken trust, but you can't do it one-sided. So I think there's wisdom too, as you're looking at where are they on that continuum. Maybe when you were started with them, you were up there at a level 10, and now it's shot down to a 5 or 4 or even 1 or in the negatives even. We have to ask the practical question, can this be rebuilt? Do they even care about rebuilding it? I think the biggest grief for me is recognizing, working with someone, whether it's an individual or an organization, and realize we were up here at a 10 and we are no longer at a 10.
Yeah, that's tough. Oof.
And they don't care about rebuilding. They just don't care. And so you can't stay in it. You have to leave for the sake of your own sanity.
Yeah. No, that's good. And yeah, I think in the leave taking too, I think how you do that, and even how I was thinking about this over the last few days as I've reflected on your book, was even in the time when they came to me, there were 2 board members who brought me this concern from a couple of other non-board members, but then I became aware that the board members also had their concerns. And we had a really lovely,
Mhm.
thoughtful, trusting conversation, at which point I completely did have
Mhm.
a grief experience of
Mm.
like, oh, and I have no interest in anything that I would do outside of this group to
Mhm.
harm this group. I mean, it's just like, I really honor the thing we have. And, um, but then, yeah, just pushing, then pushing in maybe to defensiveness, but just like, hey, here are the things I will take charge of and that I did or didn't do that I could have done better.
Mhm.
But there were a couple accusations that I thought were just false, and pushing
Mhm.
against that and wondering, is that defensiveness or just, I feel like I was doing a both and, like I was saying,
Yeah.
this is, I can't agree that this happened because there's actual evidence that it didn't happen. And
Yeah.
I can see how interpretations happen. And as the lead communicator, I'm going to take responsibility for that. So
Yeah.
I feel like I was able to, I mean, again, I want to model the community I want to live in.
Mhm.
And if I have a criticism of someone, I want people to at least entertain it as a possible truth-telling moment,
Yes.
not
Yeah.
being defensive, which I want to be. If someone's having the
Mhm.
courage to tell me something hard, I want to
Mhm.
receive it. I don't want
Mhm.
to push back. So I feel
Mhm.
like, those are those moments where you're like, there are parts of that grace space, if you will, if that's the ideal of creating that space where you want
Mhm.
to live and you want to lead and you want to co-create, and there's still some tension happens,
Yeah.
reactivity happens.
Mhm.
And I think that would be maybe a caution from, creating these dichotomies. As you said, it's really more of a continuum.
Mhm.
And, um, there are points where you say it in the book, we need to be self-protective
Mhm. Mhm.
because people aren't always looking for our good. They're not always creating grace space. They're
No.
creating their space.
Yeah. One of the temptations or the myths around gray space is it's passive or it's weak. And I
Mm,
think I want to be very clear
hmm
on the fact that I have used these practices to confront very clearly and have an assertive voice. And I have said,
hmm
listen, I would love to have this conversation, but I don't feel like it is a conversation. I'm just getting accused. So
hmm
if we can ask questions of one another, then we can have a dialogue.
That's so
I've
good.
used this language to confront dysfunctional behavior or intimidating behavior. The cool thing is you can see right where someone is. Once you're that clear, I've had people apologize and say, "Oh, you're right. I totally want to question. I'm so sorry." I've also had people say, "No, I have the right to accuse you because I'm right." Well, then it gives you the clarity that you need that the conversation is not going to go anywhere. It's just going to turn
Mm-mm.
into, yes, I did. No, I didn't. Yes, I did.
Yeah. Beat
you
up
know,
fest. Yeah.
totally. So I've used this actually to call out the communication dynamics that's happening when I'm tempted to move into fight or flight. And I hate confrontation. I hate conflict, but I want to be a place of grace. And part of being a place of creating a space grace around me wherever I go is to be able to address exactly what's happening. This is no longer about the issue that we're talking about. This is now turning into an accusation party. And if I don't stop
Mhm.
this is just going to quickly spiral down faster than we can even imagine.
hmm Yeah, that's so true. Well, and that's that pause too. It's like if you
Yeah.
can get a little bit of distance from what's happening,
Yeah.
and that again, that's a discipline to say what's going on here instead of just moving right into that risk. Whether it's the fight, the flight, the
Yeah.
removing yourself emotionally.
Freeze, fawn.
What's
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm. What are some, I just want to think out loud with you on this a little bit. What are some flags that
Mm,
you notice when gray space is being eroded?
mm. Well, I think accusation is a big one. I think when people aren't taking responsibility for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
myself or the other person,
Mm-hmm.
when there's the elephant in the room and nobody and
Mm-hmm.
that dancing around it, to
Yeah.
me, nothing drives me crazier than that. It's like, oh, let's see.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel it now,
Yes.
nobody's saying it
Yes.
out loud.
Yeah.
And a lot, I live in a community that's fairly small, and oh my gosh, everyone knows everybody. Everyone's married to everybody. And so you get in these rooms sometimes and you're like, there's another conversation going on here. Can we just
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
that's a bigger rotor to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one that hurts the most to me, actually, as much as I don't like conflict either, even though I'm
Mm-hmm.
a feisty 8, I don't actually really like it because I have a peacemaker part of me that just is, she really likes when everyone likes each other.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Well, that's the soft
and
underbelly of 8s that people don't
yeah,
realize, right?
yeah,
My
oh
8s
yeah,
in my life are the most loving people. I love them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that because that's not
Mm-hmm.
everyone's response to the 8. But is when people appease, when they give
Mm-hmm.
up the fight. And I guess that's
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing is they're fleeing
Yeah.
and they don't like it, so they're out. And I when I was at the Jesus Center, I had 2 of my senior staff they sometimes would confront, but the hardest part wasn't when they confronted. It was when they walked out of the room emotionally.
Yeah.
And it was hard to watch because you could see
Mm-hmm.
it's a self-protection thing. And
Mm-hmm.
it also just drove me bonkers because they were saying, oh, this isn't actually worth the hard conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you bring up a point too. You've heard the latest research. It's fight, flight, freeze. But the fourth one is the fawn.
Yep.
You
That's the
mentioned
piece.
appeasing.
Yeah.
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 Where it could be passively or passive aggressively or even just assertively complimenting over and over just to
Yeah.
try and survive the situation.
Well, and I just smell that stuff out. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have a intuitive, ability to see when someone's not saying what they really want to say.
Yeah.
And people don't say what they really want to say for a whole bunch of reasons. And I
Mm-hmm.
get that too. Like gray space
Mm-hmm.
isn't saying, I see that look in your eye. What
Yeah.
tell me what it is. It's like, hey, I'm noticing
Yeah.
your body just changed. Are you willing to share that?
Yeah.
Again, not an aggressive request or a demand, but
Mm-hmm.
trying to draw folks out in a kind way.
Mm-hmm.
I love you use kind a lot in your way you describe gray space. And I think,
Mm-hmm.
again, I just keep thinking, what is the world we want to live in?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yeah.
about that in politics. I think
Mm-hmm.
about that around homelessness. It's like whatever the controversy is. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I want to actually model or lead people to the community I want to live in, and it's where we all get to hang out together. It's not
Yeah.
like there's the left, there's the right.
Yeah. 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 I love that you said that. And it all goes back to choice. It's that
Mm-hmm.
I think as I wrote the book, I was in the middle of incredible conflict in my work and I could feel the fatigue. That's probably why you kept hearing the word kind. Cause I'm like, oh, they're
People just be
so
kind.
mean to each other. And I was listening to these conversations all day long of their side of the story. And it was a lot of intense conflict that was happening. And I was like, I don't think they realize they actually have a choice to actually stay curious and go find out, to actually learn to find a middle ground together, to slow it down, to hear each other's perspective. I don't think they realize they can do that. So a lot of this book was written out of weariness of just the conflict I was dealing with. And honestly, I cared about all these people I was working with, but their meanness toward one another and me trying to say, I don't think they meant that. No, that wasn't my take on it. I mean, it was a lot of that kind of pushing back on these accusations and these assumptions they were making about other people. And so I began to see, and this is where I then literally, I can still remember where I was sitting at my desk and I just quickly wrote these 7 practices out and I began coaching on them. And it became a lifeline to these people that didn't realize they didn't have to give in to the victimization of what they were feeling. They were almost getting victimized by their own emotions.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that they have a choice. And I'm so glad you brought that up because how we choose, makes all the difference.
I think what you said in the very beginning is what drove me at the Jesus Center, which is every person is created by God, has dignity, is fully worthy of love and care. And if we really live on that principle, it does change how we interact with one another.
Yeah.
Because I think so often we're driven by competition, jealousy, envy, whatever you want to call that thing. To me, it's driven out of the scarcity mentality. Like if you win,
Yeah.
if your practice is going well, if your podcast is winning and mine's not, then we're
Yeah.
at odds instead of side by side, both trying to do our good in the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, so much for me that drives my interaction with people. If I truly honor that person, even if I don't
Mm-hmm.
agree with that person,
Mm-hmm.
um, the feel that
Mm-hmm.
again, that sort of that tenor
Mm-hmm.
of kindness and gentleness and compassion
Yeah.
is genuine, right?
Yeah.
And again, that's the world I want to live in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, well said. Well, as we wrap up here, Laura, I guess I want to ask you, just because we all are working on this and we know that leadership starts from within, how do you pause? How do you cultivate grace within yourself?
Yeah, well, I do have a weekly practice that's pretty consistent
Mm,
of sort of technical term is a life review. It's a little bit more shorthand than that, but it's a gratitude practice
mm,
as well as a practice to pay attention to the things
mm,
that I'm struggling with, you
mm,
know, whether
mhm,
it's relationally or questions that just keep going on in my head or
mhm,
something that was said that was it's just creating pain for me.
mm,
And then journaling around both of those sides, the things
mhm,
that are giving me joy and where I see life and
mm,
goodness, as well as the places that just aren't clear. And
mhm,
so that's really important for me, and it makes me aware of the things that are sometimes just below the surface that I can just busily keep going and
mhm,
not pay attention to.
mhm.
So that's been a very long practice that I've done for forever.
Oh, I love it. Love it. How would you, I guess that's where I want to leave people. What would you tell them about cultivating
Mm.
grace in their own life?
We don't change the way we think just because we decide to change the way we think. And what I
Mm,
love about your book is there are behaviors, there are practices
mm,
that help embody the way we want to think. And I really
mm,
do think we need to choose to change our behaviors. And so whether it's,
mm,
setting up little trigger points that help
mhm,
you make that pause,
mhm,
or it's something you hold, or it's a ritual of gratitude, but you need to actually choose into new behaviors to replace the old habits. And that's
mm,
just brain science. I
mhm.
didn't make that up myself, but so again, if we want more grace, we need to choose to give more grace and receive more grace.
That's beautiful. Where can people find you?
I'm at goodwellconsulting.com. And what I'm most excited about is I have some online courses under the Academy tab.
Ooh,
I'm trying to make, particularly my long, long history of working in the nonprofit sector, making that wisdom and experience available to anybody. So you can go pop right on there. There are occasional blog posts through goodwellconsulting.com, but
yeah.
it's really the teaching that's most readily available there. And you can get coaching with me, particularly if you're a nonprofit executive director. That's really my niche in terms of
Mm,
coaching. But also, I'm doing a lot more of life transition coaching.
mm,
So I think last year I did 12 different clients. They all were friends, but they kept reaching out to me for life transition coaching. So I decided this year I'm going to be a little more deliberate,
good.
and that's an area
Yeah.
I'm going to push into because those are tricky times. So that's
Oh,
that's really
yeah.
fun work.
Oh,
Really
you're good at that. As just as my friend and colleague, man, I've reached
fun.
out to you for some of that. So yes, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the show today with me,
Yeah.
Laura, and just
Thanks,
for having the
Heather.
conversation. I always knew it was going to be an authentic one. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. And you know that Laura and I are both definitely cheering you all on.
Absolutely.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We had such a great time today. And obviously, We are all stepping into this life that we're made for, but isn't it nice to have a little bit of support along the way? If you want to find out more about the life that you're made for, come find me at heatherpenny.com. Go ahead and subscribe, give us a review. That really helps us out and helps spread the word. You get to step into the life that you're made for. Cheering you on.